History doesn't change when people don't speak out. It changes when someone does. Consider this. Whole empires have fallen, revolutions have started, and civilizations have changed not by troops or money, but by one voice that won't remain quiet. The power of speech is so scary that the world's most tyrannical governments have always been more afraid of poets, prophets, and truth tellers than of generals. Studies of social movements show that a single uttered truth, when amplified at the correct time, spreads quicker than any kind of propaganda. And here's the funny thing. They didn't fear your quiet. They were banking on it. But as soon as you spoke, the game was over. It wasn't the shaking confession they thought it would be. It wasn't the feeble appeal they had practiced in their imaginations. It was a shot across the room that sliced cleanly than a knife and hit them so perfectly that their smirks disappeared. And to be honest, it was almost funny to see the same folks who used to roll their eyes at you now move about like students who were caught cheating on a test. As soon as you spoke, the air became heavy and the unspoken order broke. Every mask that had been properly polished fell off, and for once, they had to be quiet because your voice was the one thing they couldn't change, couldn't laugh off, or control. It's not about being loud. It's not about yelling into the abyss. This is about being picketed by acclaim or approbation, but by fire. And when you eventually spoke, you didn't just shift the subject. You altered the whole thing. First, your statements showed that they couldn't hide the facts. That's the way it is. The air changed as soon as you spoke, because what was previously concealed was now clear. Lies can only grow in the dark when no one is brave enough to question them. But when you spoke, you brought everything into the open, and all of a sudden, there was no going back. They thought your quiet was a safety net. They were counting on you not saying anything so they could keep pretending, keep changing the script to make it work for them, and keep doing what they wanted. But as soon as you spoke, their story fell apart like a house of cards in a hurricane. It wasn't about how loud you were. It wasn't even about feelings. It was the truth of what you stated that made it so. It didn't require any drama. There was no need to make it seem worse than it was. It was rough, strong, and couldn't be moved. And as soon as those words got into the room, they became live proof, something that even the worst liar couldn't get rid of. They might roll their eyes, sneer, or fling accusations, but none of it could compare to the unmistakable truth of what you let out. Evidence doesn't make a case. Evidence doesn't need to be believed. It simply stays there. And your remarks had that weight. The most scary thing for them was discovering that your voice didn't simply contradict their falsehoods. It verified what they had always feared, that they could never control the truth. It had been within you the whole time, waiting for the right time to come out. And when it did, it hit in a way that even quiet couldn't change. That's why they ran about. That's why they attempted to lie, deny, or drown it out. Because at that time, what you said meant more than just words. They were the receipt, the record, the proof that could never be changed, and that showed them how wrong they were. Not only did you convey a tale when you talked, but you also sealed it, and nothing, no explanation, no diversion, no performance. It could change what had just been set in stone. Number 2. Talking wasn't brave. It was a way to stay alive. People frequently think that opening their mouths is a brave and great move, but that's not the case. For you, being silent wasn't strong. It was like slowly dying. Keeping the truth from others was like carrying a weight that became heavier every day, making it hard to breathe. It wasn't about showing off or being brave when you spoke. It was about not letting the strain of what was to be stated kill you without a fight. It wasn't a polished performance when you eventually let the words out. It was the end of something that had been eating away at you for too long, and as everything came out, it was evident that you hadn't said something because you wanted to seem tough. You had spoken something because you couldn't stay silent any longer. You were dying quicker from silence than from the truth's blowback. That was something they never got. They believed you were scared and didn't say anything. They didn't know that terror had already changed into something else. Need. The distinction is important. Courage is doing something even when you are frightened. Not having a choice is what survival is all about. You talked because if you didn't, the weight of what they wanted you to bear would have erased you. Your words were like air, and silence was like poison. That changed everything. It was like your lungs finally opened up again once the truth was out. It wasn't about getting applause. It had nothing to do with recognition. It was about living completely, without being devastated by what wasn't spoken. And that's why it scared them. They couldn't call it courage because they might just say it was acting. They couldn't say it was weakness since weakness doesn't burst like that. They understood that your speech came from a place deeper than bravery. It came from pure survival, and survival always prevails because it doesn't care what things look like. It doesn't care what it takes to go through. Feda, you didn't simply talk, you changed the balance of power. That's something they never saw coming. They thought they were in charge for a long time, controlling the plot and the mood in every area. They assumed that since you didn't say anything, you were giving in, which showed that they were in charge. But as soon as you said anything, that illusion was gone. The room stopped revolving around them all of a sudden. It was all about the truth you told. Everyone there could feel the change. It's not about titles or jobs. It's about being in charge of the story. They told the narrative as long as you remained silent. They decided what was remembered, what was believed, and what was disregarded as long as you stayed quiet. But your words changed everything. You took away what they felt they owned, the ability to regulate how others see things. You were now in charge, not them, since truth is more important than performance. And at that point, you had it. There was no denying the change. Their confidence fell, their assurance faded, and the power they had shown off started to slide away from them. People who weren't playing sensed the difference too. People who used to lean toward them now lean toward you. This is because power always goes to the one who is brave enough to say what others only murmur. And that's what you did. You turned whispers into statements, And by doing that, you made a realignment happen. It wasn't just about telling the truth, it was also about teaching everyone that being silent didn't mean agreeing, and being quiet didn't mean being weak. You took yourself free from under their control by speaking out. You placed them beneath your weight. That's why it hurts so much. They thought they were in charge when they were really only controlling things. They forgot that supremacy only lasts as long as someone calls it out. And you did. After then, the equilibrium changed. They were no longer safe. You had told them and everyone else that those who keep quiet don't have power. The one who dares to speak when silence is needed does. Number 4. Your voice didn't echo. It broke glass. That break isn't for looks. It's forensics. You can ignore or tune out an echo since it goes away as fast as it comes. When something shatters, it sends pieces flying everywhere, and each piece shows a reality that can't be hidden. When you talked, there was no echo that faded with time. You made a break that everyone had to look at. People who depended on a font had to navigate around the damage, instead of acting like nothing had occurred. After you break something, you touch it differently. Conversations that used to be simple are now hard. There is now a little chance that alliances that used to seem permanent may fall apart, since the proof of what was broken is between individuals, like a table that can't be flipped back over. People who build their comfort on smooth surfaces realize that such surfaces are now permanently damaged. That's the pain. You didn't just point out a problem. You changed the way people interacted such that avoiding it became a deliberate decision instead of an instinct. A broken object makes you choose. It makes excuses tougher to sell, since the visual reality goes against the story they worked so hard to tell. The fact that the glass is fractured makes excuses, rationalizations, and rehearsed apologies all seem like guesswork. People can't pretend that the past is still there. The present has proof that alters what will be accepted, what will be questioned, and what will be remembered. That honesty, no matter how harsh, is purifying. The moment won't let you feel comfy again. It makes everyone think about where they were when the break occurred. The effect for you is permanency. Your remarks are like a reference point that lasts longer than any spin or willful forgetting. The damage is the point of no return, and it shows that you were the one who made it happen. That break is your legacy, plain and simple. Number 5. They weren't afraid of how many words you used, but how heavy they were. You may ignore sound, but you can't ignore meaning. There was no torrent of noise when you spoke that might be drowned out or made fun of. It was a hefty, exact reality that wouldn't budge or be ignored. The difference is easy to see. Loudness grabs your attention for a time, but gravity modifies how things settle. Your truth made the room shift to a new core of seriousness. They thought of what you said as a performance, since performances can be changed. You may laugh at, watch again, or ignore a program tomorrow, but what you said wasn't a show. They had explicit facts, clear reasoning, and repercussions that hit like lead. People felt the tug. People who used to talk about comfortable falsehoods were suddenly forced to face the truth. That type of pull doesn't match with what they say. It changed their goals, loyalties, and the things they thought would keep them safe. Which shows who can handle it and who can't, which is bad for them. It showed the difference between those who talk to earn praise and others who talk to avoid damage. The people who wanted applause could keep roaring until their throats hurt, but their clamor couldn't compete with the one statement that proved it. As soon as your statement was out there, it became a silent test. People either accepted the truth and changed, or they proved themselves by resisting it and seeming tiny in the process. They used the typical tricks, distraction, laughter, and anger because they are cheap ways to make a show, not to get to the heart of the matter. None of the tools made the bulk less. Instead, they made their emotions clearer. The more serious the reality, the worse the spin seemed. The weight didn't force anybody to agree. It only made it hard to keep up the charade without seeming clearly dishonest. What really hurt them in the end wasn't shouting or acting. There was an undeniable draw towards something that was more important to them than their appearance. Your remarks changed the room's axis and wouldn't let anybody ignore them. They were afraid of you not because you were noisy, but because you made the world tilt toward an honest axis that they couldn't stop. Sixth, when you spoke, masks peeled off quicker than defenses. People who had spent years practicing how to act in every setting suddenly realized that there was no script that suited the reality they had revealed. The polished grins, rehearsed anger, and sympathetic nods they had developed were all just surface-level drama to keep others from seeing what really transpired. Your statements not only went against what they did, but they've also showed the cracks. That exposure made them act right away. Some sought to hold on to their parts by speaking louder. Some others frowncy, because the role they were playing needed a reality that wasn't there anymore. Those masks were useful instruments. They let individuals dodge responsibility, sacrifice empathy for appearances, and avoid the repercussions while retaining their good name. As soon as you yanked the thread, every carefully planned emotion began to fall apart. People who had been kind in public showed what they were really thinking. People who wore care like a badge revealed that concern was just a costume, not a real commitment. It hurt to see the fall, because it took away the comfortable uncertainty they had come to rely on. All of a sudden, their alternatives were clear to see. You didn't want to disgrace anybody when this happened. It occurred because the truth makes things more important than performance can. Masks may still exist in a society where looks are everything. When someone brings up a reality that doesn't fit with how things seem, masks either change to become honest or they fall off, exposing the person below. When you see a mask slip, it's a test. Will this individual take responsibility, or will they put on a new, more subtle mask? The distinction is all you need to know about them. When defenses crumble after masks, the results are clear and lasting. Relationships that were focused on looks ended. Alliances that were based on convenience fell apart, and for you, the end outcome was clear: the environment around you finally matched up with reality instead of a dream. People who were important showed up, and those who weren't left. Your remarks didn't only smash down walls, they made things obvious so everyone could see who was genuine and who was playing. 7. Your words made silence part of the crime. The moment you spoke, neutrality was gone. Before that point, individuals could hide behind being silent and act that not making a choice was fair. But your voice took that cover off. It made everyone in the room face what quiet actually meant: agreeing with the deception, protecting the guilty, or being afraid of losing comfort. Silence was no longer just background noise. It was a statement. Truth has that kind of force when you say it. It doesn't only show who is lying, it also shows who is watching. People who used to blend in with the wallpaper were suddenly recognized for who they truly were, either too involved in keeping the peace at your cost or too scared to reveal what they already knew. At that moment, silence itself became proof. Every word you spoke made the things you didn't say stand out more. Since the difference between doing something and not doing anything was clear, what bothered them the most was that you didn't simply call out bad conduct. You had everyone else take a side. Comfort was no longer a protection. People who felt they could make both sides pleased were stuck and had to show their true colors. They had to show who they were, not by what they said, but by what they didn't say. Some people sought to hide behind imprecise gestures or half statements, but the truth has a way of making things that are unclear appear weak. The less they spoke, the more evident their viewpoint became. That's why what you said meant so much. They not only tore down the deception, but they also told everyone who was watching to display their real colors. Some people opted to be brave and stand with you. Some people went quiet, while others openly revealed themselves as guardians of lies. No matter how they reacted, none of them were left alone. Your voice had transformed quiet into a mirror, and once that mirror was held up, no one could get away from seeing themselves. That is how talking alters both stories and individuals. Number 8. You didn't start a fight. You showed that it was already going on. There had always been tension, lying behind courteous remarks, phony grins, and carefully planned silences. You pulled back the veil. You didn't ignite the fire. They did. They had made a fake peace by ignoring problems and covering up gaps with charm and diversions. But peace based on lies isn't peace at all. It's a show waiting for someone to be courageous enough to call it out. That's precisely what your voice did. You didn't make people separate when you spoke. You showed them how to do it. People who had been acting like they were getting along were already fighting, full of anger, jealousy, or guilt. Their calmness wasn't real. It was a thin layer of stillness that kept them together. You didn't make things worse by revealing the truth. Instead, you took off the lid they had been holding down with both hands, and all of a sudden, everything they believed they could keep within came flooding out. This is why they were so angry. They didn't detest your words the most. They despised what they made them see. They could no longer ignore the cracks in their relationships, the falsehoods in their tales, or the rot that was hidden under the surface. You didn't make them hate you or each other. You showed that hatred was always there, built into the ground they were standing on. And once it was out in the open, there was no way to act like it wasn't true. That's the reality that makes you feel bad. When someone talks, real peace doesn't fall apart. If there is harmony, being honest makes it stronger. What if honesty tears it apart? Then what was there wasn't harmony at all. What you said made that truth clear. You took away the appearance of order and made everyone confess that turmoil had been brewing under the surface the whole time. The fire was theirs, not yours. You just showed the room what it had been breathing in all along. Number 9. You weren't loud. You were clear. That hurt more than anything else. People may dismiss loudness, say it's just emotion, or call it theatrical. People are habituated to noise and learn how to ignore it. But accuracy is different. Precision doesn't give any opportunity for escape. Since it doesn't employ extra words, there aren't any dispersed images with it. It hits the mark perfectly, with no extra stuff to water down its effect. Everything you spoke had a purpose, and that purpose took away their comfort with surgical precision. Noise attempts to get you to give up. Accuracy takes away your weapons. You didn't have to yell or fill the air with arguments. You chose the scalpel over the hammer, and that decision made your words unbreakable. A hammer may split things wide open, yet it could also miss its target. But a scalpel makes it clear. It cuts away excuses until just the truth is left, with crisp edges that divide truth from falsehoods. What bothered them the most was that your remarks didn't leave any room for interpretation. There was nothing they could distort, no over-the-top claims they could make fun of, and no way for them to get around. Your exactness showed the difference between speaking to be heard and speaking to be understood. A lot of people fling words about like confetti, hoping that at least one sticks. You didn't. You said the truth so clearly that it couldn't be softened or misunderstood. That's why they fell down after that. They weren't arguing over how loud they were. They were fighting over how accurate they were. And accuracy is unbeatable because it speaks for itself. They depended on distraction and commotion to protect themselves from anything that may hurt them. But when you cut right through the noise, their plans fell apart. No amount of yelling or twisting could change the reality that your words had already cut through the noise. You weren't very loud. You didn't have to be. Precision was more powerful than volume ever could be. That's why your voice didn't simply land. It stayed there, hard to move, and completely accurate. 10. Speaking changed you before it changed them. That's the part that no one speaks about. The change that occurs within you when you say your truth. There was always that weight on your mind, that continual bargaining going on in your thoughts before you spoke. You were trying to figure out when, how, or if you should say anything at all. You thought about the expense, concerned about what might happen next, and nearly talked yourself into thinking that staying quiet was safer. But as the words finally came out, something within you clicked, and you knew that the act had already changed you. You weren't simply protecting yourself anymore. You went too far and couldn't go back. You became someone who would never apologize for being alive again. You had tasted the freedom of being honest and found it stronger than fear. That change wasn't about how people behaved. It was about how you felt in your own flesh for the first time. Talking took away the fear that had hindered you from becoming as big as you were supposed to be. At that same instant, you knew you didn't need anyone's permission to take up space, speak the truth, or exist without shrinking. Their answer didn't really matter, since the most essential thing had already occurred inside of you. It didn't matter whether they fought back, denied it, or lashed out. You had become a new version of yourself, a version that didn't need affirmation and didn't question if the truth was too much for others to handle. You learned that you can't change who you are or what you say. That's why they let you go even before you said anything that scared them. You figured out that silence was the prison and speaking was the key. At that moment, you didn't simply fight falsehoods. You stood up for yourself. And once you take ownership of yourself, no one can put you back in the box they made for you. Number 11. They thought you would beg for forgiveness instead of giving a verdict. They thought you would shrink, say you're sorry, and quietly agree to their demands, which was what they had planned. They thought your humility was something they could use as money for a long time. Instead of an apology, your voice conveyed something colder and clearer, a judgment. It wasn't anger, just for the purpose of being angry or to make a big deal out of it. It was a straightforward evaluation based on facts, memories, and the repercussions that their actions necessitated. They thought they would feel sorry, but they were held responsible, and accountability doesn't ask for anything. It says what occurred and who is to blame. That shocked them since it changed the roles they had practiced. They had practiced how to take the blame and how to make an apology that made things go back to normal. They weren't ready for someone who wouldn't tolerate a performance instead of justice. Your statements didn't ask for pity. They indicated what would happen. They wrote down what was real, what was due, and what they could no longer put up with. At that moment, your voice read them like a judge reading a sentence. Clear, definitive, and without any request for compassion. The shock wasn't simply in being challenged. It was in being assessed and found lacking without the distraction of theatrics, because a verdict has weight. It doesn't ask for a deal as an apology does. It makes rules and sets expectations for how history will be written down. People who live by managing their impressions are scared of that kind of finality, because they can charm their way out of it. When someone doesn't ask for forgiveness but instead asks for punishment, their instinctive response of anger, downplaying, or fake humility doesn't work. They are not guilty in public, but they are scrambling because the private ledger they kept in silence has just been totaled and made public. Your voice didn't sound like you were desperate. It sounded like you were judging because you were clear and strong. not because you needed something that took away their power. You changed the rules of the game forever. The moment you stopped asking for validation and started demanding accountability, they thought you were weak because you held back before. But by getting you wrong, they showed how badly they have miscalculated the cost of truth. Number 12. Your words made their secrets public property. What they had kept secret and protected so fiercely, like private treasure, became known to everyone the moment you spoke. Secrets are only powerful when they are kept secret, when they can be used as weapons, traded, or used to get what you want. They lose their sharpness when they are exposed. They are no longer under control, and the people who used to hold on to them like shields now find themselves standing in the open, unprotected. That's what your words did. You took away the exclusivity and made the truth available to everyone. The unraveling happened right away. They had gained power by selectively revealing information and deciding who should know what and who should not. But when you broke down that system with just one statement, you took away their power to control how people see things. Their secrets were no longer worth anything. Anyone could see them. The whole balance of power changed with that change. They could no longer use the excuse of privacy or the mystery of what others didn't get to hide behind. They didn't own the truth anymore. That was the thing that scared them the most. You didn't just talk, you gave them more power over their control. All of a sudden, they weren't the only ones who knew this story. Everyone could judge, measure, and compare for themselves. And once the truth is out, it can't go back to being hidden. You can't forget what you learned. They could deny it, try to downplay it, or make up new lies to cover it up. But the damage was already done. Exposure had taken away exclusivity, and that's the beauty and the cruelty of it. Once secrets are out in the open, they lose their power. They don't go away, but they don't hurt the same way anymore. You broke the lock they had put on reality with your words, and by doing so, you made it belong to everyone. Their weapon was no longer useful. It was just history. You didn't just talk, you made things impossible to change. Speaking the truth out loud changes the timeline. Before you spoke, stories were in limbo for grabs and soft. After you spoke, history got a permanent mark. You can't refile, edit, or rewind that moment. Deniers can yell, spin doctors can put on shows, and defenders can rewrite headlines until they are hoarse. But none of that changes the fact that the truth was once spoken and heard. That is what scares them the most about it. People remember things differently. People repeat what you said, and slowly, a public record forms from private courage. These are all examples of irreversibility. People have to deal with your voice as a point of reference. The laws of optics and memory change. What used to be optional is now a must. People who relied on confusion and plausible deniability now have less room to move around. Their plans only work when there is still doubt. Your spoken truth takes away their doubt and makes them responsible for what happens. This kind of finality also makes you make choices. Institutions, friendships, and reputations must now be reconstructed around an undeniable fact, rather than merely modified by a convenient apology. People who thought that time would help them find peace now find that time is working against them because the truth is permanent. People talk about it, remember it in meetings, and use it when they need to be held accountable. The longer it lasts, the stronger it gets. Irreversibility isn't about making a big deal out of it. It's useful. It changes how decisions are made in the future. It changes who people trust, who gets promoted, and who people listen to. It becomes proof in the most basic sense, something that holds arguments together and affects the results. That anchor is permanent, even if it doesn't show up in the news. They can get angry, lie, and try to change the story, but none of those things will work. All of those moves are attempts to fix a timeline that has already been changed. The truth you spoke moves forward in every interaction that comes after it, quietly shaping what is and isn't possible. That's why your voice didn't just land. It changed the future that people would have to live with. 13. You show that the chosen don't wait for permission to be heard. That's not a slogan. It's a change in how power works. People who wait for invitations or polite openings are practicing a kind of permission seeking that keeps them small. Getting picked isn't about someone else giving you a chance. It's about deciding that your truth is important enough to stake a claim in a room where everyone else would rather you stay quiet. That claim was the act that gave you a name when you spoke. It didn't need a certificate or applause. It needed to be sure. And that was enough to make people treat you differently. The way you said it made it clear that you meant it.